Hello everybody, I'm Alex, I'm from Jacquard. I'm here today to talk to you about dyes, when you should use which dye, and which dye is the right dye for the correct job. We have produced this little cheat sheet here. This is our dye roadmap. It has all of our dyes that we sell across the top and all of the materials, hopefully all of the materials that you could ever expect to dye along the side, as well as the dyeing auxiliaries like citric acid, soda ash, salt, and those kinds of things. It tells you whether it's soluble in alcohol or acetone, and then the heat and temperature on here. So we think, in our experience, the dyes are the most esoteric part of the store. The staff is not generally as familiar with dyes as they might be with acrylic paints, oil paints, drawing materials that it's not taught a lot in art school. So we're trying to produce these kind of educational resources for you, your customers, and almost most importantly, your staff. They interact with the most people. This is a poorly understood part of our business, and even though people really love dyes, you want to be able to choose the right dye for the right job. So I'm going to go over several pieces of fabric that I've dyed with different dyes and why I would use one over the other. And then our newest dye that we've added to our collection are the basic dyes. They're really a fun, hands-on, and you can use them in ways different than the other dyes that we have. So today I'm going to be dissolving them in alcohol. They are our alcohol-soluble dye, and we're going to be able to do some pretty cool stuff because basic dyes dye a strange variety of surfaces. So you're going to find out about those today. So first, I guess I'll do acid dyes. Acid dyes are really, really beautiful. They create ionic bonds with protein fibers. And protein fibers means that they're animal derived. So whether it's silk coming from a worm or wool coming from a sheep, you can actually dye feathers with acid dye. So all of those brightly colored feather boas that you see, those are always dyed with acid dyes. Acid dyes do not work on plant fibers basically at all. If you try to use an acid dye on a cotton shirt, it's not going to dye at all. But on protein fibers, you're going to get these unbelievable, beautiful colors that are super, super bright. And it's really for wool, acid dye is your very best choice. Silk has more options, but wool is one of our most difficult to dye fibers. And if you want to dye wool, you should really use acid dye. This is pretty market dependent. If you have customers that want to use acid dyes, you'll probably know about it. Acid dyes don't fit in every art supply store, but they can be valuable, especially if you have people doing a lot of silk or wool. Oh, the other thing I didn't mention about acid dyes, they work great on nylon. Nylon is actually a synthetic fiber, but it's very, very, very similar to a protein fiber in terms of its structure. So the acid dyes attach to nylon very well, and it's a great choice for nylon, especially spandex, because it works at 180 degrees, which is steaming hot water. That's different than the iDye poly, which requires a boil at 212, which can deform spandex. So if you can use either dye on nylon, but the acid dyes are less likely to deform the nylon. Of course, yarn is often made of wool. This is a great option too for acid dyes. So let's talk about plant fibers. The Procyon MX dye. This is a special dye. Most dyes require heat. Procyon MX you can really use in a range of about 0 degrees to 100 degrees. So it's really a wide range. It works with room temperature water. That's the reason people use it for tie-dye. The really cool thing about Procyon is it's very, very permanent. It is a fiber reactive dye, so it's actually chemically bonded to this fabric. So no matter how many times you wash it, you cannot use water just to get it out. You have to bleach it, use some kind of reducing agent to get rid of the dye in the fiber and actually break those chemical bonds. Otherwise, it is permanently in there, and that's why you see old guys walking around with tie-dye from the 80s, and it still looks great. It's very light resistant, and it's bleed proof. It's also a reason it's a very good choice for children's clothes, especially babies' clothes. If they suck on this, no dye is going to get into their mouth because it's chemically bonded to the fabric. It doesn't bleed. It's not going to get anywhere else. It is a cold water dye, so if you don't want to do something on the stove, it's a great option, and it also allows you to batch. Batching is when you dye something, you add the dye on, you wrap it up in some kind of airtight container, and you let it sit overnight usually. That's how people do tie-dye. They put it in a plastic bag after they've wrapped it up in rubber bands. Why would you do that? Why would you need to leave it wet so long? It's actually that chemical, because it is chemically attached to the fiber, that reaction is actually very slow compared to how quickly some of our other dyes work, especially like iDye works on an order of like 15 minutes. Procyon dye works on the order of hours. So the longer it stays wet, the longer it doesn't dry out, it's still reacting, so you get brighter and brighter colors. That's one reason why you can use Procyon for even screen printing. You can thicken this dye and screen print it. You would need to batch it overnight again. And then you end up with a perfectly soft screen printed image that doesn't feel like anything, which is pretty nice. Cotton, linen, hemp, the rayon is actually is made from cellulose. It is made from plant fibers, even though it's a synthetic. And that is what most of the bamboo that you're hearing about is rayon made from bamboo pulp. So that's a really popular fiber right now. Procyon MX is a great dye for that fiber. Modal is, there's like many different versions of rayon, and they're named different names, but modal, bamboo, those are different kinds of rayon. That's why they feel so soft. It's supposed to be the plant-based silk. People ask me a lot about whether you should dye a mixed blend with tie-dye. This is a great example of a black, blue, and red dyed 50-50 shirt. So this is a 50% polyester, 50% cotton. Compare this one to this one. It's quite a big difference. You only get half the threads to dye in this one. None of the polyester threads are going to dye. So you get a very different result depending on the content of the fiber, and that's a really important lesson to learn anytime you're dyeing. The content of the fiber is as important as the dye that you use. So you do have to match the fiber to the dye that you're using. Now this is also a mixed blend. It's mostly polyester, but it has a little bit of cotton content, and I've dyed both of them at the same time. So this is mostly polyester, but I added 1 packet of the iDye Poly turquoise and the iDye Natural Pink. The interesting thing about the polyester dye is that it has a completely different chemistry than any of our other dyes, so that if you mix it in one dye bath, all of the polyester dye will go to the polyester portion of the garment, and all of the iDye Natural will go to the cotton portion of the garment. And neither the two shall meet, and it's a really cool way to dye something. This went in white, and it came out looking like this. And it was only, I think it was boiled for about 15 minutes. The iDye Poly is our hottest dye. It does require a boil. It's not just like, well, you better get close to it. There is a switch that flips at 212 degrees Fahrenheit where the dye becomes activated. And those are our highest energy dyes. You have to boil them. People say, can I use it in the washing machine? iDye Natural you can use in the washing machine, but iDye Poly you've got to put on the stove. Again, with the mixed blends, this used to be a white sports sock, and I dyed all of the polyester threads turquoise and all the cotton threads black. I just boiled it for 15 minutes. It went in white, came out looking like this.
So are there threads that the natural or the poly will not dye?
The only kind of fabric that neither one, so this is a great question. The question is there a type of thread that neither the poly or the natural will dye? There is. It's acrylic. Acrylic fibers are the toughest fiber to dye, but I do have some examples I'm going to get to in a minute. So there might be room there to actually, if you had a blend of polyester, acrylic, and cotton, there is a potential there that you could dye 3 different colors in one garment at the same time. Yeah?
So you put 4 colors in the same dye?
Absolutely. In the same dye pot, you mix them together. It's one step. You have two different dyes, one garment that has multiple threads of different kind. Now, this doesn't work with a poly silk blend because, strangely, silk will dye with polyester dyes. So it works best with a cellulose fiber, something that's made from a plant, and polyester. This is another thing that's a great use for the polyester dye. This is Harrison Fogel from my parents' store, Preston Art Center, makes these little Alumilite casting resin figurines, and they're made, it's epoxy resin. You can actually dye the epoxy resin with polyester dye. So you can tint it. It's totally, totally transparent. You can really see through it. It's beautiful. You can get an even color that way. So that's an excellent product for the sort of the epoxy craze that's going on right now. So there's more than one way to do it. You can mix the powder in with the resin before it's set, and you can also dip it while it's boiling into, and that's how he did it because he got multiple colors that way. He dipped half of it in, then he turned it around and dipped the other half in a different color. It's really an excellent, so what else? That's the iDye poly. What else are people doing with it? They're dyeing wigs with it. Wigs are almost always polyester and nylon, both of which dye with iDye poly. This is a really popular thing in cosplay, and all of the wigs on RuPaul's Drag Race are dyed with iDye poly. So they have those like crazy pink and purple wigs. They're done with this product. We're about the only ones who make a polyester dye, so it's our best-selling kind of dye, and it's basically because we're the only ones who do it. The Indigo dye. Indigo dye is a special dye. It's the oldest dye known to human beings. It's been found in Egyptian tombs. It's been everywhere. Everybody knows this dye because it's the dye for blue jeans. The best thing about Indigo dye is the way it works. It's a vat dye. It's different than the only other dye that we sell that's a vat dye are the solar fast dyes. Vat dyes start one color and they end up another color. So they start either colorless or some other color. Indigo begins as a green. Green is the soluble form of the dye, so it will dissolve in the water and you'll get even color that way. The blue form of the dye is once it's been exposed to oxygen, the crystals actually come out of the solution and get stuck in the fiber. So you can't dye with the blue form of the dye because it won't penetrate into the fabric the way the green form will. So the way you use indigo dye is really pretty interesting. You have a reducing agent, which is sodium hydrosulfite. Soda ash is a pH modifier, makes the pH high. And then you need the indigo dye. You mix all three together in a bucket, you let it sit for half an hour, and then it's ready to go, and you can dip with it. I consider it our best dye value because one of these indigo kits, it says it'll do 15 t-shirts. I have personally done 30 t-shirts, 30 handkerchiefs, a pair of jeans, and a jean jacket with one kit. I rarely am able to actually exhaust it. It's a really great group activity because because everybody loves the color, number one. Everybody loves the color change, number two. And then it goes a really long way and it's cheap. So all of those reasons, it's a great activity. We did it at my daughter's baby shower, and anybody who was, all of the kids we had probably like 30 onesies and different baby clothes there. We're dipping it all over the place. They loved it. This is also a really great project that you can't do with any other dye. This is a easy batik project using Elmer's glue. You just use it doesn't have to be Elmer's, but any washable school glue will work. You just put the glue down on the surface, and because the fabric doesn't have to spend any time in the dye bath, you dip it in, it comes out bright green. It doesn't have time, the glue doesn't have time to wash out. And then once it turns blue, you can rinse it. A little bit of agitation like that will take all of the glue out, and you've got a perfect batik. Really, really simple. People who are little tiny kids can do this, and adults also love it and can do complex drawings. So this is a really cool, if anyone's ever done batik, you know that is your worst nightmare when you're trying to get the wax back out of you have to boil the fabric, you have to iron it, and do all this stuff to get the wax to come back out. There's no easier way to do batik than to do it this way. The solar fast dye. Solar fast dye is the other vat dye that we have, but instead of being the color being changed by the oxygen in the air, it's actually changed by UV light. So once UV light hits it, it starts to change color. You can do this inside and all day it won't change color, but once you take it into the sun, it will immediately start changing color. That's why we can print photographs with it. It comes in 13 different colors, so you have a really nice palette to work with. These dyes, and vat dyes in general, including Indigo, are very, very light fast. They don't tend to fade at all in the sun, which is great. And then solar fast is also particularly wash fast. You can wash these 100 times. You won't lose any color. It's really impressive. I've definitely washed tons of clothing, and the fabric is going to wear out before the image does. The other cool thing you can do with solar fast is you can do things like this. This is a double exposure. I actually screen printed the brain onto the shirt, and then I put a transparency over top of it and put a photograph on the areas that I screen printed. So this is actually a super powerful screen printing technique that nobody does. It's really unusual. This can actually be difficult to explain to people, but as far as a professional screen printer doing this, they have a lot of advantages. Yeah.
What are you using as the screen printing keynote?
I have a screen that has a brain on it, and I'm just squeegeeing. You can definitely thicken the dye. We have a screen printing thickener with it that you just add a little bit of the liquid and you shake it up. That thickener, by the way, can be used for almost anything. You can put it into, if you want thicker paint, you can use that solar fast thickener in acrylics. You can use it on other stuff. It's actually really useful. But if you are in a hurry or lazy, it's actually possible to screen print it. It's very thin for a screen printing material, but out of the bottle, I actually screen print it pretty often. Especially if I'm doing like one or two, it can kind of start dripping through after that. But if you're just doing a couple, it's fine. It's great for just screen printing. You just screen print it, take it out into the sun, expose it, it's done, and now you have a totally soft, very brightly colored screen print that has no feeling to it.
And you don't need to heat set.
You don't need to heat set it, it's been set by the sun. So it's actually a really cool screen printing technique that people are not taking advantage of right now. Mostly because in a professional setting, to get it into the sun might be difficult, but as far as hobbyists and things, it's perfect. Yes?
So that dye, I always meant it was in the vat.
And
Does it mean something?
So no, it is called the vat dye for that purpose, and that's how you use indigo dye. These dyes, technically, these are actually old dyes. They're traditional dyes, and there are places in India where they use these. They actually do it in a vat system. The issue is it can give you really beautiful, super, super permanent colors. The way you have to expose it if you don't use light is with sulfuric acid. So it's not really a consumer-friendly way to dye something. So the sunlight is fine, and the dye itself is very safe, but the exposure method if you were to do it in a factory, it would involve sulfuric acid. So we've been actually working on some way to do this without the sulfuric acid. So far, we haven't figured it out. So our newest dye is called basic dye, and basic dye is the one that you use for acrylic. So this is an excellent dye for costuming, cosplay. Theater departments love this dye. I know Hulls in Connecticut sells a ton to the Yale Theater Department. And the reason is these are the brightest dyes that exist. They're super, super strong colorants. Most of the other dyes that we have, you need to use between 4 and 6% to get like a dark or medium dark shade of color. You need to use basic dyes at like 2%. They're really, really, really powerful. They will stain almost anything. So in a pinch, they can be used on almost any surface. Now, what's the drawback of the basic dyes? They are not very light fast. So it's not the best dye choice if you're going to like hang something in the window, or if it's just going to be exposed to light. It's also not good for outdoor use. But inside, for home decor, it's perfectly great. I use it on my daughter's drawing table. She has like one of those raw wood from IKEA type of tables. It is awesome on wood. You get these kind of colors that you like wouldn't believe. They're beautiful, beautiful. And it works exactly like a stain. These do dissolve in alcohol, so you can basically make a big marker with some alcohol and some basic dye and a sponge. It doesn't matter what wood. You want it to be raw. Like it shouldn't be treated. And
Pine, anything.
any kind of wood will accept it. These are also great dyes for paper. If you want like brightly colored papers, so that gives you an idea about something about the light fastness. If you've ever seen crepe or like party decorations that have been like left in the sun and they're just completely bleached out, those are all basic dyes. So they're not super light fast except when you use them on acrylic. Nobody knows why, but for some reason when you dye acrylic with basic dyes, they become light fast. So on acrylic fabric, whether it's a sweater, yarn is really big right now. People are using a lot of acrylic yarn because it feels so soft. They like it a lot, but it doesn't come in enough colors for them. This is a great product for them. The other thing that basic dye is really good for is leather. So we all know that painting shoes is a big deal right now. People are dyeing shoes more than they were like 2 years ago. People are using acid dyes, and they're also using iDye. I didn't mention iDye very much. iDye is the overall dye for any natural fabric. It's not the best dye for any fabric, but it's a good dye for everything. So like if I was going to dye cotton, I would either use iDye or Procyon dye. If I wanted to never bleed and be super, super permanent, I use Procyon dye. If I want to do it fast and very even, I use iDye. So in the same kind of thing with silk. It works great on silk, it looks beautiful, but it's not as permanent and not as wash fast as the acid dye is on silk. So how did I do this? I literally dissolved some basic dye in a little bit of alcohol and I just wiped it on with a sponge and it's totally done. It doesn't come off on my hands anymore. It has a super high affinity for any kind of protein fiber, including your hands. So keep that in mind when you're using basic dyes. What else does basic dye do? It also happens to be the same dye that we use in our alcohol inks. So you can actually use the basic dye with the alcohol inks and get an effect that you haven't seen before.
So if you're using it on wood, it won't raise the grain.
And that's another great point. If you're using basic dye on wood, you can absolutely dissolve it in water as well. Like when I made that coat, I dissolved it in a pot of water and heated it on the stove. But if you use it with alcohol and you use it to paint wood, it's great. It's even more soluble in alcohol than it is in water. So you can really pack the pigment in, the dye into it. And it's not going to raise the grain, especially on things like pine and other like soft woods that tend to warp. So that's a really nice feature of it too. So let's do some. What color do we want to use? How about some malachite? The malachite this is a beautiful like teal color. Basic dyes are really interesting. This one is actually a crystal, and if you look at it, it's like a shiny metallic crystal. It dissolves in water. So
Is it actually related to the malachite stone?
it has nothing to do with malachite stone. It is the same color. Some people may recognize this dye. This is a treatment for aquariums. It can actually it kills some kind of fungus or something in aquariums, which is weird. So I'm just going to take a little bit. The basic dye, yeah, the malachite basic dye. Some of them are not healthy for fish, but this is actually a good point. Basic dyes in general are known to be like among the most poisonous dyes. So that seems really scary when I tell you that right now. We only sell the very safest of the basic dyes. These are no more dangerous than our other dyes. What is the dye protocol as far as safety is concerned? Dyes do not penetrate your skin, so getting dyes on your skin is not really a big deal. It's just dyeing the outer dead layer of skin. What don't you want to do with dyes? You don't really want to get them in your eye, just because it can stain your eye. That can be weird, but also breathing them. The only time a dye is really dangerous, and this is talking about long-term exposure, you don't want to breathe them on a regular basis. So when they're in liquid, they're totally safe, but when they're in a powder form, especially if you're dealing with the dry powder, it can be a good idea to wear a mask. I'm not doing it very close to my face right now, so I think it should be all right. And these dyes are pretty safe. So I'm just going to put a tiny bit of powder on here. This is on a clay board. And I have here some Pinata Clear Extender. This is the alcohol ink without the color. It's just, so people ask me what's the difference between the extender and the cleanup solution. The cleanup solution is pure alcohol. It's like 99.9%. There's a denaturing agent inside, so you can't drink it. It is ethanol. But the Claro extender is the alcohol and the binder. This is what holds it to the surface. So this is what you would make your inks with if you were going to make your own alcohol inks. So this like gives a totally different look than the alcohol inks do because the grains of the dye are getting wet with alcohol. And also, no one is doing this right now. I do think this is probably the best way to sell the basic dyes in your stores is by coupling them with the alcohol inks, which are incredibly hot right now, of course. So you get that kind of burst of color that you don't see because you don't have any powdered dye. You're working with your alcohol inks. So it's pretty interesting. You can get something cool going with those. Yeah, and it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful color. Yeah, for sure. So what else can we do with basic dyes? Let's do some leather. I got some old shoes from the Goodwill. These are great. One thing when you're dealing with shoes, you do want to remove the waterproofer on there. So very often there's a waterproofing agent that's going to keep it from being dyed. I'm pretty sure I removed this several months ago, so I'm not going to worry about it. Acetone. So nail polish remover is a great thing in a pinch. You can go to the drugstore and get some stuff. Nail polish remover takes that right off. You can use rubbing alcohol too. It takes a little more elbow grease. But either one's fine. I do have some I had someone say they tried to dissolve the basic dyes in alcohol. I have some 70% alcohol here to try. I wanted to see if it works. Though it's strange to me because they should be soluble in both, they are soluble in both water and alcohol, so I don't see how it didn't work for them. They may have added an enormous amount of powder for all I know, but you can dissolve a lot of dye in it. It gets really dark. I have access to 100% ethanol, so that is a big question I get about the Pinata inks. What's different about our alcohol inks and other people's alcohol inks? Ours are ethanol based, so these are the same dyes that go in alcohol inks. So basic dyes are really, really soluble in ethanol, more so than in isopropyl alcohol, and that's why Pinata has deeper, richer colors than other brands of alcohol ink. That's why people think ours is the artist grade alcohol ink, because the colors are so rich. So let's do something in, what color should we use on this? Keep in mind, if I use turquoise on this, this is going to mix with the brown underneath, and it's going to end up looking more like the malachite. Does anybody have any preferences? I've got pink, red. Red? Let's try red. So I'm going to add some alcohol here. I'm not going to measure anything like I never do.
So how non-light-based is this?
So it's a good question. The malachite is especially fadey. The crystal violet, the more intense the color, the more light it absorbs.
Okay.
So you can almost tell by how bright the colors are which ones are the least light fast. The malachite and the crystal violet are among the least, but it's actually not that bad. I've been trying to figure this out because I want to tell people about these dyes, but I want to give them the right information. I dyed a bunch of my daughter's like wooden toy type of stuff with these basic dyes, and all the ones that I've left inside look as good as the day I made them. The one that I forgot on the back porch for a few days was completely faded on one side. So it really seems to be direct sunlight for long exposure will do it. It's noticeable.
Sometimes people use them for musical instruments.
Yeah, that's a good question.
So
They may not want. You can also use Procyon dye on wood.
And then mix it with alcohol.
You wouldn't mix. It's not soluble in alcohol. You would have to do that with water.
Okay.
I would say, I think you could do it, but if they were like maybe playing a lot of festivals outside, it may not be a good idea. Yeah, they could also use a UV varnish, which is probably a good idea. Oh, interesting. So the question was, does the 70% alcohol work very well? And I see right away. Let's do a taste test. We're going to take the Pepsi Challenge here, and we're going to use some strong ethanol compared to the 70% alcohol. And I think this is the cleanup solution for piñata. And this is like, you can get this at the hardware store too, just denatured alcohol. If you need if you need like a lot. I know buying these, vodka works. You want like Everclear, like it should be really high alcohol content.
And what was that, sorry? A pinata?
That's the piñata cleanup solution.
Here, do you wanna see it?
Oh, okay.
Wow, so you can really tell the difference here between these two colors, right? The higher alcohol content really is much more soluble. That's interesting. So that must be what he was doing. He was using 70%. Get the 90% stuff, it works great. So how do you apply it though? Once it's in alcohol, what do? Literally, you just brush it on. So that's dyed. It's like totally dyed now.
And if you wanted to do that in canvas too, you would use the Procyon.
So you could use Procyon. You could use this too. It would work also. Procyon dye would work great though. You would also want to keep it on longer. So like this instantly bonds basically to the leather. Procyon dye, like we've talked about, you batch it. You let it sit for a while. So that's the thing you would do.
This specifically mentioned wood, beads, acrylic fibers, plastics, and leather.
Yeah, so the plastics is like mostly acrylic, but there are some other synthetics that it works on. Leather, paper.
Oh, before you do that, can you do that? On
Just as a
little bit of that,
comparison?
just to compare, just to
Sure.
see? Sorry,
No problem.
I was just curious. If
I'm going to squeeze this out. There we go. Yeah, so this is going to be a lighter. It's hard to see. Sometimes it's hard to see on. But look at the red there
that's-
versus the red there. It just looks wet, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's
So,
exactly. Thank you for doing that.
no problem.
Sorry, I'm gonna see.
No. But like literally, this is going to dry so fast, and it's all done now. So I'm finished. So it's like, it couldn't be any easier. This is a really fun project. And now you've got like a rich maroon leather shoe. You can see this is the one I did the crystal violet on. That's purple now. So you get really different results depending on the color. So what about on wood? I use the same alcohol solution. I love doing this because it just makes the grain look so rich, and you really get a nice.
That's your squeegee. You can mark your squeegee.
Not everyone's going to want a red squeegee. That's right. Oh, I did that with one time I used Dynaflow on an easel that I had cobbled together from broken pieces, and then we sold it. How long did it take to sell? 2 weeks, and then they were like, "Where do we get more of these?" So now, yeah, as soon as this dries, this is like totally done. So it's a really fun project on wood, leather. A lot of times people want to tie-dye silk, and they say, "Well, I want to use Procyon dye on silk." Well, Procyon's not the best choice for silk, but the cool thing about basic dyes is a lot like Procyon, they work on something that is, they work colder than other dyes, and you can use them oh, this is a big scarf. So they work colder, so you can use, it's like a protein fiber option for silk, and these are actually, I talked about how the acid dyes were just super beautiful and all that. Basic dyes are even brighter, and they're even more beautiful colors on silk. So let's dissolve a few I think we should put it over here, and then everyone can participate. We'll just dissolve as many colors as we can in alcohol, and then people can drip the color on, and it'll be dyed like really beautifully. And anybody who wants, I have a bunch of stuff here. Like I have a leather belt that I started to dye black. This is an option. If you have a brown leather belt and you want it to be black, you can just dissolve it in some alcohol and wipe it down, and you've got a black belt now. You could do it with a leather jacket or whatever you want. So it's a pretty cool option.
The more layers you do, the darker it gets.
The more layers you do, the darker it gets. And then same's true with if you end up dyeing in water, the longer you leave it in, the hotter the water gets, the darker it'll get. That coat, I only used 2%. Like I said, I only used 2% dye on that. I could have probably gone up to 5 or 6% and gotten it really, really dark. But I only dyed it for 20 minutes. So it got really, really intensely colored just from a very short amount of time.
Does it matter if you, like I know on some mediums, you need to add the alcohol to the pigment or the pigment to the alcohol? Does it make any difference?
It doesn't matter
You
whether
know
you
what
add
I'm
the,
talking about?
yeah, whether you add, I guess the main reason you might not want to do it this way is because you might push the powder up into your face if you are pouring it in over the dye.
Okay.
So let's see.
But it doesn't make any difference on the
It doesn't actually,
outcome?
no.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can fill some of these with, if you want. Well, I'll do that. You've opened those bottles. That would be great.
Okay.
Do you sell the in a bigger container?
The alcohol? It's a good idea. We don't do it.
And
This is the biggest bottle we sell right now. How much time do we have? 2:40. Okay, so we should get going.
Can you use the extender with pearl?
Yeah, the extender does work with Prolix. One of the issues and the reason we haven't added a lot of Prolix colors to the Pinata line is the binder in the Pinata tends to matte anything. So it kind of mattes out the Prolix color. So certain colors look better than the others. The copper and the pearls, the pearl whites look pretty good. But on the other colors, like if you use like pearl blue with it, it just mattes it out and it doesn't look metallic anymore. So that's a little bit annoying. Okay.
So go, step back a little ways.
Yeah.
You're using the acid dye on the epoxy.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it was the iDye poly on the
It's
epoxy.
iDye on poly. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's pretty light fast.
Yes.
If you were mixing it, I have a guy that does turnings,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been kind of steered them away from dyes, because they didn't think they were light fast enough.
Well,
And
it's.
so this,
I feel like it's a misunderstanding in the industry. Like everybody's talking about archival, and of course, if you have something in a museum, you want it to be archival. But dyes are really mostly permanent, so they aren't going to last. You may not be able to pass it down to your great grandchildren, but in general, they're going to last the lifetime of your. Yeah. Right, but on a pen, if they're doing like turnings for pens, he was doing sculpture. Yeah, so it would make a difference.
And he does them in combination with wood.
Do they go outside?
No, they're like basically indoors.
It would probably be fine. I think it would be fine.
But he definitely mixes them with epoxy.
Right. So he may use some.
You have to be careful about breathing it, because if you're mixing it with epoxy, then you go from dry to wet, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. This is my favorite color, by the way. This is the crystal violet. That's the one I did the coat with. My daughter really loves that color.
When you spoke about like 2% or 8%, is that
It's by weight of the fabric.
Oh, okay.
So that usually means, you know, if you have 10 pounds of fabric, you want 0.2 for 2%, 0.2 pounds. Usually, because the way dyes work is they fill up whatever, there's like little active sites. So whether it's, Procyon, at some point you can't fit any more dye into the fabric, right? And it's because they have little sites where the dye connects to the fiber. So that's why you measure the dye, instead of by how much water you're using, you measure it based on how much fabric you have.
And do you guys have a product that strips the color, like say you
Absolutely, we have color remover. Color remover takes the color out of the fabric without damaging it like bleach does. Yep.
And so then if you wanted to replace it, then you would use the discharge agent.
Well, no. So the discharge agent and the color remover are basically the same kind of technology. The decolorant paste removes the color in specific areas, so you can draw it or paint it or screen print it. The color remover is just a powder that you add to water that removes the color. It's called the decolorant paste, and that's a paste that you can paint where you want it, and it will remove the color. Okay, so these dyes are good. Did I do any malachite in these? No.
So
No. You didn't do any orange.
the discharge paste, that's not, you know, it used to be
We,
Rondelet.
yeah, we call it decolorant now.
Oh, okay, okay.
People did not like the name discharge paste very much.
Oh, that's it.
It is the technical term for the product, but
Okay.
it's not good. You hear a lot of people go, ugh. Yeah. Sure, yeah. So we're gonna just drip some, feel free to come over, I have all these pipettes, and we're just gonna drip some of these dyes on the silk scarf. Should be fun. And there are gloves if you wanna use them. But I'd also like to show, I wanna use this one. Like I brought this big piece of wood. I found this palette, and I want to show people how easy this is.
I'm gonna go all over the house dyeing it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I do. I go all over the house looking for raw wood, and I want to dye it. So I just use a big. This is literally a big marker. So like Copic markers, alcohol inks, they all use basic dyes because they're soluble in alcohol. So this is just a giant marker, you know, and you can, and it's like so fast. It's just incredible.
Learn about the creative possibilities of artsy and bronzy liquid finishes.
So you go from having a raw, boring piece of wood to having something really exciting. This is just a cruddy old palette, but like, you know, people are always like, oh, we're gonna make this furniture out of palettes, but like, why not color it in a beautiful way? And you know, the intensity of these colors is just so high. You just can't, you don't get something like, it keeps the wood grain. You just don't get something like this from a paint. It's just a completely different animal. It dries, it's totally dry already, you know, and you can get a really, there's no dripping. Yeah. And if you need, and you can go over it again and get darker and darker colors, but like, it's awesome. Well, it's still a little wet. Trying to prove it doesn't come off. But yeah, I mean, it's so simple. It's easier than painting, right? I mean, you don't have to worry about, yeah.
It's not like fast for outdoor furniture.
So you wouldn't use this on outdoor furniture, right? Indoors, it's fine. My daughter's table gets hit by the sun every morning, but it's, you know, through glass, a lot of the UV is actually blocked. That's why it's possible to get a sunburn, like in a window, but you have to be there for hours and hours and hours, not like 20 minutes like outside. So if anybody wants to try it out, come over here and we will dye this scarf. Should be fun. It's great for, you know, I did it to my belt. It's great for refurbing some like faded leather.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah.
Everything that I
Mhm. It depends. What did you do? Well, come by and let's talk about it. Sounds good. Okay, just want some more alcohol. That was very informative, though, about the 70% alcohol.
Yeah, it did make a difference.
Look at that. It doesn't even, there's just like dye down in the bottom still. Interesting.
The other one I already took over there, the red.
Excellent.
You know, there was some foresight about the tables were covered in plastic.
Yeah. I think that was one of my suggestions last year. I was like, we're going to need plastic on these tables.
Thank you very much. I'd like to review.
Absolutely. That's really all there is to it. We're just having fun now. So thank you so much for coming. I hope you know, I just brought those to show how you could use them as alcohol inks.
Can we try it?
Yeah, absolutely. Dust some of that powder on, and then drip the extender over it. And you know, even on clapboard, a little bit of alcohol will just work.
Try it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Masterpiece has new clip.
Yes, I did.
Alcohol.
Hmm. We talked to Mooney about it. Yeah. Mhm.
Oh, Mooney, I should have known.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do any more. I'm afraid I'm going to have my clothes.